Prospero House. My name's Giles Semper. I'm the Business Liaison Manager for Better Bankside. I'm welcoming you today on behalf of three organisations, Better Bankside, the London Bridge Business Improvement District and Business Link London. First, before saying anything else, I'd like to say a huge thanks to Prospero House. I don't know if there's anybody here from Prospero House, but they're continual kind of benefactors to us and other organisations in the area, right down to letting us wrap the Christmas presents for our appeal here back in December. So thanks to them again. This is the second event that we've run as kind of joint agencies. Some of you will have come to our networking event in November, which was at the Glaziers Hall and was run in conjunction with GLE 1 London. The theory here for us, for Better Bankside and London Bridge, I think, is both about widening the audience that we draw on for these events, but also widening the pool of expertise that we can draw on in delivering events. On the topic of this particular event, there's a common affliction among companies, I think, that having a website is rather like having an annual review. You know, it's kind of an obligation more than an asset, really. And I hope today is going to be finding out how much of an asset your website can be and some simple things you can do to enhance that. But before we start the traditional announcements, we're going to kind of blaze right through today, the whole session. So we're not going to have a break in the middle. So what I've agreed with Tony is that if you could sidle out, if you need the loos, which is straight out the door and turn left, or if you need a cup of tea or coffee. If you need a cup of tea or coffee, you might want to get one now as well. Afterwards, we'll be adjourning to the ground floor. That's between 6 and 7 for a few drinks and a bit of networking. It looks scary down there at the moment, those people, clarins, who have already seem to have drunk a large amount of wine. And so if you're brave enough or find that attractive in any way, then join us down there. Inevitably, we'll be evaluating this event, so you'll get an email tomorrow from us asking you to fill in an online survey, the person who's drawn from the people who enter the evaluation will get a bottle of champagne from Bedales, which is very nice champagne. And finally, we're filming today's event for a podcast. This is about the 4th or 5th one of these that we've done. Building up a library on the Better Bankside website, and London Bridge, I think, starting to do the same. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand over at this point to Andy Barrow from Business Link. He's going to tell you a little bit more about Business Link and then also introduce you to our speaker.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Business Link. How many of you have heard of Business Link? Have any of you actually used our services? Yeah. Okay. So some of you know about Business Link. For those of you that don't, we provide business support to small and medium-sized businesses. That's within up to 250 employees and businesses within the M25. I won't say any more because part of the pack I've given you, you've got our generic brochure that tells you all about our services. So I won't tell you what you can read. Part of what I've also given you is I've given you a copy of our events booklet. We do run events. If there's anything there that interests you, you can book on our website. You've also got a copy of the slides of the presentation. What you've also got is a thing called a business review form. Now, we are funded by the London Development Agency, and we need to prove to them that we do actually go and work with businesses around London. And the way that we do that is we actually ask people to say that they've interacted with Business Link London. And this form is to let us capture this afternoon. I've asked you already, if you will, to fill out the contact details at the top of the form. So name, address, telephone number, or what have you. You'll see a little bit further down, there's company name, type of business. There's then a request for some company financial information. Now some of you, and I can understand why, might be a little bit reluctant to fill that in. What we're after is an indication of the size of your business. So do you turn over 10,000 or 100,000 or £1 million a year? Do you make £1 profit, £10 profit or £10,000 profit? So I'm after ballpark indication figures in there. If you want to give me to the pound, I'm very grateful, but I could quite understand why you might be a little reluctant to go into exact detail. There are then 3 spaces, so things that strike you from the presentation, you've got a room to write them in to remind yourself, because it's a multi-part form. So we will take away the white copies, you can retain the bottom two. And lastly, there's the standard sort of information about ethnicity and gender that we are asked to collect. Not for any big brother reason, but so we can actually tailor our services better to meet people that have got specific needs, specific requirements. But please, I'd ask you to complete these, because if you don't, then Business Link London actually can't justify its existence. We can't continue helping small businesses and doing presentations like this afternoon's for free. Now, as a small incentive, if you give me back a nice white completed form, I'll exchange it for a 256k USB stick. So, at the end, I will be inquiring, and I'll hand you back a USB stick. Right, that's the end of the commercial, you'll be pleased to hear. Tony Catamol. I've worked with Tony for more years than I want to think about now, I think, really. But Tony has got a great expertise in applications of technology to business. And in particular, he has got some interesting things to say about e-marketing, e-business and websites. So I'll hand over to Tony Catamol.
Thank you, Andy. The first thing I would emphasise is I'm not a techie. I'm a business person, just like all of you. I've sat in your chairs. I've been a director of a small business. I've been a senior manager of many large businesses. But I am fascinated, and have been pretty well all of my career, with the business benefits that businesses can get from the use of technology. Yeah? So it's the use of this, not the how, that I think is interesting. And if you get the impression that I'm trying to teach you to write your own websites, I really am not, because I really don't think that that's a good idea. I think just like any other specialist skill, you're very much better off getting somebody who knows what they're doing to do it. What I do want you to do is to know how to manage them, because many of them don't know their jobs. So, my objective out of our session today is firstly to help you to understand that the most important thing about your website is its content. That is the words in it. And through that, I want to help you to see how you can ensure that your website will be judged by the search engines, Google, MSN and Yahoo, as being sufficiently important and sufficiently significant that your website will be offered up to a potential client if they're looking for what you have to offer. Now, part of that will be about good website structure, so we'll talk about what you need to be thinking about in terms of the structure of your website. And of course, all of this is about meeting your customer needs, and therefore we need to think about what are your customer needs and how can you best address them. But as I said in my preamble, my main objective is for you to understand that managing the project of developing your website is something that is your responsibility, and you should not delegate it to a techie. Get a techie to do it, but it's your responsibility to manage it. So, why are you going to have a website? Because everybody else has got one. Well, to an extent, actually, I would argue that today that's almost true. That unless your business only does business to people that walk up to you in person, and you never ever have any remote relationship with clients, then a website is now virtually essential. Now, there need only be one page that says this is who we are, this is where we are, this is how you contact us, and this is in very simple terms what we do. Because we've now got very good research evidence that shows that with the increasing distribution of broadband connections, almost everybody that has a broadband connection would use the internet to look up a telephone number rather than directory inquiries, rather than a paper directory. It's just so quick and easy. So if a potential customer of yours wants to make contact with you, looks on the internet and can't find a website that says this is who we are and this is how to contact us, it actually, I think today, says something quite harmful about the nature of your business. Yeah? That you either are insubstantial, or you're out of date, or you're disorganized. So I do actually believe that a website is now virtually essential. But nevertheless, it is an important point that you have to have a better reason, certainly for having more of a website than just that everybody else has it. So, why are you going to be making yourself visible on the internet, on the web? Yeah? And the first thing that you need to think about is, well, actually, what is it you're selling? Now, I don't know what your businesses are, but my guess is, from previous groups, that a significant number of you are not selling something that you can stub your toe on. You're selling service, you're selling business services, you're selling domestic services, whatever. My guess is that a lot of you will not be selling a physical object. In which case, you really do need to think quite hard about what that actually is, not from your point of view, but from the point of view of the potential customer. Yeah? You also, therefore, need to think about who you're selling it to. Now, I know that sounds like a really silly thing to say, because, of course, it's the person that writes the check or the person that comes along and collects or whatever. But just think about the whole sector of children's objects, children's services. You might well need to influence the child to want it, but it may well be the parent that pays for it, but it may well be a teacher who either encourages it or in some way facilitates it, or it may well involve a service to a school, in which case it may be one of the governors who is the proponent of it, or it may be the local education authority. So when I say, who are you selling to, it's not always that obvious. And it may well be that, in fact, you're selling to more than one person. For instance, if you're selling cars, any car manufacturer will tell you that, there are some aspects of a car's design that the female in a partnership will choose, and there are other aspects that the man will choose. And therefore your message needs to be quite clearly differentiated. So there are many products and services where it's not clear who your customer is. About what is it that they need to hear from you about your product or your service? And what is it that would motivate them to go from the website into actually contacting you, whether it's by email, whether it's by telephone or whatever? And therefore, a lot of what you'll be hearing this evening is about thinking about your website from the outside in rather than from the inside out. And if I have the most frequent criticism that I think I would make of certainly first websites is that they come across as being the owners of the business standing inside a stockade with a megaphone shouting out at the world what they want to tell the world about themselves. And lots of it is about we're the best or whatever. And it's really boring, and the world isn't interested. The world is interested in information. Yeah? And you need to think about the ways in which using the web to communicate is different from communicating face-to-face or phone or letter. Think also about the limitations of what a website can do. Your website can only do a maximum of 3 things. These are business websites. I concede that entertainment websites do other things, but for business purposes, a website can only do 3 things. And when you're thinking about your website or looking at your website, if it doesn't address one of those 3 things, stop doing it because it isn't helpful. The first thing is, it can bring you to the attention of somebody that's looking for the product or the service that you would like to offer, but that they don't know you exist. Now that's all about being found. That's all about search engine optimization. It's all about understanding how a search engine will select whose website they offer up in response to a question. And therefore some parts of your website need to be very explicitly thought through as servicing that need. The second thing that it can do is that it can reassure a potential customer that they want to make contact with you. Today, because most people have an internet connection beside them at work and at home, if they're thinking about buying a new product, a new service or whatever, and they hear about a potential supplier, whether it's by an internet search or whether it's through word of mouth, through advertising or whatever, the first thing they will do, and just think of your own experience, is you'll go to their website and check them out. And when they do that, they'll have in the back of their mind a checklist of the characteristics or the criteria they're looking for. Now, you know what they're going to be. It could be, do they open at late one evening? It could be, do they do products for children? It could be, do they do it in pink as well as green? It could be, do they take credit cards? It could be, have they ever done business with a school? You don't know. So it's all about providing answers to questions. And the one thing that is for certain is that if they check you out and you don't have the answers and they can find a competitor who has the answers, that's who they're going to talk to. So it's a lost opportunity. Now, the website is not going to sell you to a customer. They're not going to commit themselves at that point. But it certainly is today, and this has really changed in the last 2 years since broadband became so widely distributed. It has become almost the normal step in qualifying a potential supplier before you actually make contact with them. And if your website fails to reassure them, then you run the risk that they'll go elsewhere. Now, if you do actually sell something you can stub a toe on, then of course the third possibility is that your website could actually sell something online, which is having a shopping cart. And if you're going to do that, you need to do it very slickly and very efficiently. But those are the only things that a website can do. A website is not there to feed your ego. Your website is not there to make you look impressive to your friends and neighbours down the pub. Yeah? Your website is a business tool, and you need to be very clear what it's there for and what it will deliver on your behalf. Think now about how a potential customer is going to find your website. The first thing is, of course, your domain name needs to be on every piece of paper, every carton, and everything else that goes out of your premises. Not just your business card, not just your letterhead. Don't forget packaging, don't forget delivery notes, don't forget instruction sheets, etc. Yeah? Because they may well want to contact you not tomorrow when they're going to remember anyway, but in a month's time, in 6 months' time or whatever, and you don't want to make it difficult for them to come back and re-engage with you. So make sure it's everywhere. Search engine optimization is the way that they will find you by searching on the internet, and we're going to talk about that in a great deal more detail. But let's just think about some of the other ways that you can get your message out to both existing and potential customers. Email still remains a very important business tool. Yes, we all hate spam. Yes, spam takes up 50% of the traffic on the internet. And if there wasn't any spam, the internet would be either twice as fast or half as expensive. But email is still a very valuable tool. And if you can do email that contains sufficiently interesting or useful information that people pass it on to a friend, that's viral marketing and it's very powerful. Blogs and social networks are the rapidly growing way that people start to find out information. Because finding information from people who share your interests and who you trust is much more reassuring than having to make your own choice. So increasingly you'll find that whether it's somebody looking for a recommendation about a hotel from one of the websites that has shared reviews, whether it's a group of people talking about the minutiae of cake icing, it doesn't matter. The social networking groups are very, very important places where people get information. And therefore, it's somewhere that you should be if you want to offer what you have to a group of people that have demonstrated an interest in what you do by clustering together in a network that is relevant to your product or service. Yes, of course, don't forget terrestrial advertising of your website. A domain is actually much easier for a member of the public to remember from a passing vehicle than a telephone number. None of us can remember a London telephone number just from having seen it go past on a vehicle. But remembering a www.joeblogs.co.uk is relatively easy to do. So there's much more value in spreading your domain name around than there is spreading your telephone number around. So if you have a company vehicle, even if you use your private vehicle for work, think about a magnetic sticker or something that during the working week identifies your company on your car, and you take it off at weekends. Think about if you have a building, particularly if it faces a railway line or a bus route, wonderful opportunity. Even tattoo it on the side of the poodle when you take the poodle out for a walk in the park. Yeah. Everybody always asks about pay-per-click. Google AdWords, Overture, and the other. They have a role to play, but they should be in addition to a well-designed website. If the only way you can drive traffic to your website is through Google, by paying through pay-per-click, then your website isn't working properly. Your website should give you your base load of potential customers, and you should only be using pay-per-click as a tactical mechanism for getting additional traffic or of announcing new products or special offers or things like that. Yeah? It should be the finishing point, not the starting point. So, you're going to have a website. You want to be found. So, what do you need to do to ensure that if somebody who's looking for you can find you on the internet using... Can we accept that when I say Google, I mean Google, Yahoo, MSN, and any other search engine, but it gets tedious, so I have to repeat that. So, for Google, read. Yeah? So, you want to be found by a Google search. You need to understand that there are lots of tricks that somebody might come up with which might temporarily fool Google into thinking that your website is more important than it really is. But there's a guerrilla war going on because the Google technicians are desperate to spot those tricks and to discount them. So you need to understand that this is a constantly moving feast. Because at the end of the day, what search engines are looking for, because what search engines are selling, is relevance, access to relevant information, and we'll look about that in a bit more detail. Hence, avoid optimization tricks. Avoid the snake oil salesman that comes around and says, pay me £1,000 and I'll get your website to the top of Google. Because unless they're going to do it properly, in a way that is sustainable, optimization tricks are at best a temporary patch, and at worst could actually harm your reputation with Google, and that could be quite difficult to get back. You need to understand that search engines are computers. Computers do not read pictures. You can read a picture. If I hold up that which is a picture, you can read it. But that picture is just a black hole to a computer. It's only if that is a text document, and therefore there are words that the computer can read, can the computer get any information from it. So therefore, Flash, Java, graphics, and frames are all components of a website which are effectively blinding you to Google, and therefore should either be not used at all or only used judiciously and for a very specific purpose. We'll also talk about the importance of getting other websites to link to your website and what significance that has for Google, and we will also talk about the need to update your website. The key to Google's task, if you like, or their objective, is all about relevance. So just think about, why do you choose to use Google or MSN or Yahoo or any of the other search engines? And I'm sure that the answer is because in your experience, using that gets you the answers you're looking for more quickly, more certainly, more reliably. It gives you access to relevant information. And therefore, if you were the MD of Google or one of the other search engines, that's your product. That's what you're selling. And by selling it, more people choose to use your product, therefore you get more opportunities to sell advertising and make a lot of money. And Google is now a very rich and very big company. So the search engines are selling access to relevant answers. And their success depends upon them continuing to do it better than the competition. And therefore, all of the time they are looking at their criteria for choosing websites to offer up as answers. Therefore, you need to understand what it is that they judge to be relevant and offer it, which I have to say is not difficult. And it's in providing relevant data, relevant answers, that the search engines compete with each other. Now, I've talked about snake oil salesmen, and there are a lot of them around. If somebody says to you that they will come and optimize your website, unless they describe something like that process with all of its steps, you will be wasting your money in going with them. Yeah? Lots of them effectively will sell you just that bit, which, as you'll see later, is actually completely unnecessary anyway, and therefore gives you very little benefit. Yeah? And therefore, that is your criteria for what is a valid and commercially useful offer to optimize your website. And it also, therefore, forms the chapter structure or the agenda for the rest of this presentation. So let's start off at the top with keywords or key phrases. You want to be found by somebody who is using a search engine to look for the product or the service that you'd like to offer them. So the first thing that you've got to do is to forget what you know about your business and think about what would a potential customer be looking for. What phrase will they key into Google to look, to search, for which you want to go, yeah, I'm interested in servicing you. I've said generally a 3-word phrase because if you think about your own experience, if you put in a single word into Google, you get 100 million hits. You then start to refine it. You add another word and it starts to shrink down to a few million. But there is still a problem that the first few pages may well be irrelevant to you. They may be from different countries or they may be from different products or sectors. And generally speaking, it takes 3 words to refine a search to the point where the first few pages of Google are offering you realistic choices. And therefore, you need to be thinking in terms of what 3-word phrases might a potential customer key into Google for which you want to be the answer. It should be self-evident that the one thing that you don't include in the phrase is your product name or your company name, because if they knew that, they'd go straight to your website anyway. Yeah, they don't know that, and therefore there is no point in trying to optimize your website for your own company name. Which, incidentally, is almost invariably what the snake oil salesman promised to do. I will make your website, meaning your company name, come up at the top of Google. Like, boring. And, you know, unless yours is a very common name, it'll be at the top of Google anyway, because, like, what's it competing with? So, you know, they're giving you nothing for a lot of money, so it really isn't of any great value. But no, you want people who are looking for your product or service to find you. Now, this is a lot more difficult to do than you imagine, because you live, breathe and talk about your product, your service, your industry, etc. You will share with your colleagues, your competitors and your suppliers a language, and it's an insider's language. It is actually, in dictionary terms, a jargon, because that's what a jargon means. Yeah? It's an insider's specific language. You cannot assume that your potential customer will use that language. And therefore, you've got to unlearn your own jargon and think about what might your customer be looking for. Which brings you right back to one of the earlier questions I said, which is, who are you talking to? Because if we go back to the children's products issue, who's going to be doing the searching? Is it the parent? Yes, increasingly parents these days are IT literate. They might do the search themselves, but I can point to an awful lot where they are IT illiterate and therefore would actually ask their daughter or their son to do the search for them. And what phraseology would the child use? But if you think about the school, is it the school itself doing the search? Is it one of the governors? Etc. And therefore, the language that you choose to use has to be thought through very carefully. And it has to be the language of the customer, not yours. One possible solution would be to make use of your friends, relatives and whatever. Relatives less so, because there's a risk of them sharing your jargon, but certainly friends. And if you're down the pub of a weekend, you might choose to use that as an opportunity to bounce ideas or get them to bounce ideas off you. In which case, wait until they've had a few drinks. You might even contribute them, because that actually has a useful purpose. Because you actually want to break down their inhibitions. Because when you ask them the question, okay, you know a bit about what my business offers. If you wanted what I have to offer, what would you key into Google to look for it? And you want them to have broken down their inhibitions so they don't go, no, that's silly. Because actually that might be exactly what somebody might use. Yeah? And therefore you do want those silly suggestions. And you write them all down. Following morning, when you've got over the hangover, you check them. And of course some of them are going to be really, really, really silly, and you can discount those. But a lot of it's a real goldmine of opportunity, because this is an outsider's view of your business and your product. You then start thinking about how to test these for how useful are they going to be. So the first thing is you become your own customer. You sit down and you key in these phrases and see what Google offers you. Now hopefully what you're going to find is competitors, which is actually quite interesting, because that tells you quite a lot about how well your competitors are positioning themselves on the internet. But it reassures you that this is a phrase that has the potential to be judged as being a relevant answer to what you have to offer. If you don't find competitors, either you've got it fundamentally wrong, in which case you can discard it, or you've lucked onto a phrase that none of your competitors have thought about, in which case you have a winner. How you judge which it is, I leave to you. The second thing you can do is that for certainly Google AdWords, through the Google metrics system, you can actually go and ask them, how many times has somebody asked for that phrase in the recent past? Because there's not a lot of point in taking the trouble to build a part of your website around a phrase that nobody will ever ask for. But be judicious about this. If you're selling a mass volume product, yes, volume is important. If nobody looks for it, there's no point in doing it. If, on the other hand, your business is about contracts, and one new contract is actually valuable quite significantly, then having a phrase which only one person a year looks for, if yours is the only website that is offered up in answer, might actually be a very, very good strategy. Because you're not competing with anybody else, because nobody else has thought about using that phrase, and when that one potential customer keys in that slightly off-the-wall phrase, ka-ching, you're the only solution in town. So don't discard low-volume phrases. And I would argue that for small businesses that do best by marketing into niches, any phrase that has very, very large traffic, you probably would be as well to discount, simply because you'll never compete. Because clearly there are so many other people competing for that phrase, the chances of you getting onto the first few pages of Google are very small. So what you want is the low-hanging fruit, the ones that are going to give you easy wins with customers. Think hard about geography. If you go to an internet terminal and key in Nike trainers, you're going to get, I don't know, 1 million hits. You're going to get shoe shops in Johannesburg, New York, Paris, Moscow, etc. Now, unless you have a mail order business for Nike trainers, there is no point in being found for that. And therefore, including within your phrases something which limits the search to something that you could realistically service, which might be London Bridge, Borough, Southwark, London, South East England, England or the UK, you immediately cut out from the competition all of the websites that don't service that geography. Because, of course, your customers will do the same, because they're going to have the same problem. They're going to go onto the internet, they're going to look for a particular phrase, they don't want a supplier in Johannesburg, New York or wherever, so they will almost certainly use a geographical reference to narrow down the answers. So if your website has been designed to be the answer to that geographically restricted question, ka-ching, you're there. And if I can give you a very simple for instance, I was with a small car maintenance company in North London. They had a dire website, it was very pretty but didn't really say anything. And I was, and the guy had a terminal on his desk, so we searched for car servicing in, it wasn't actually Camden, but let's say it was. Not one website came up. And I said to him, if you were moving into this area, you bought a flat in Camden, you had a car, you wanted it fixed, what would be the first thing you do when the car needs servicing? You would go to Google and key in car servicing in Camden. You have that phrase on your website, you will get 100% of the people that are looking for that service, because none of your competitors have had the nous to do it. Yeah? So it's a wonderful opportunity to actually steal a march on your competitors. Now, how does Google decide what pages to offer up to us as being a relevant answer to a question? Google, not unnaturally, do not actually publicise what they're looking for. Well, sorry, no, that's not true. They actually publicise in great detail what they're looking for, but not how they measure it. They make it very clear that what they're looking for is good, relevant information that somebody might be looking for. How they judge that, they keep to themselves for obvious reasons, because if you knew the answer, you'd know how to fix it. What they do is they have programs that literally continuously search the whole of the World Wide Web, looking for any computer that is connected to it. When they find a computer, it looks for any web page that's accessible. Note web page, not website. And this is a very important distinction. So getting your home page right is actually not that helpful. It's every single page in your website that needs to be right. And indeed, as you'll see when we move on, your home page is actually the least important page in the whole website. So it finds a web page. What it's then going to try and do is decide what phrase or phrases might that page be a relevant answer to. And it stores that away in a directory. And when you do a Google search, it's actually searching the directory, not the internet. Yeah? So when it comes to a page that is a web page, it goes through a process of deciding what that page is a relevant answer to. And the first thing it'll do is it'll read the page title. And the page title should tell it, this is what this page is about. This is what you should expect to find this page talking about. Which means that it's critically important that every page in your website has its own unique and relevant title. And I would argue that if you're designing a page to be found, the page title ought to be the key phrase that you're building this page around, or part of that key phrase. It'll then go on to read the meta description, which is the internet description of the page and what's on it. Now the meta description should be an echo of the page title, but amplified. So those two together serve notice on Google, this page is about this topic. Yeah? Now it's not going to accept your word for it, so it will then go on to actually read the page. You'll have heard about meta keywords. Meta keywords used to be judged very, very significant by Google, with the result that the snake oil salesman grossly abused the process. And all sorts of websites had keywords that were packed with irrelevant phrases. The most popular, of course, were ones that were about sex. So you might be selling cement mixers, but if you want lots of people to find your website, having keywords that talk about sex brings you lots of traffic. So Google got very wise to that, and now largely discounts keywords entirely, with the one exception that it's quite a useful way of providing variance on what you're trying to talk about. It's quite a good place, for instance, to put variance on the geography, because you're not going to be able to have a page that talks about selling left-handed widgets in London Bridge, and another one about Southwark, and another one about Lambeth or whatever. So using the keywords as a place to provide these alternates has quite a lot of merit. But that's about the only thing that you use it for. Now, those three pieces of information are not visible to your customers. Yeah, they're part of the technical structure of a page. They're just words, it's just text, but they're there to tell the internet things. Having told Google what you claim your page is going to be about, Google wants confirmation that it is about that. So it'll then read the actual page. So the first thing that it's expecting is a major page heading. And just like in word processing, web pages use templates and they use styles. And if you think about Word, when you're doing a word processing document, you select a style for heading 1, for bullet point, for whatever. The internet, web pages use exactly the same concept. And the highest level of heading is an H1 heading. So it will expect to find an H1 heading that is the visible heading for the page that your customers will see, and that should again say this is what this page is about. And it ought really to be very similar or identical to the page title. It's then going to read all the words on this page, and it's going to build a frequency table. And it will judge this page to be a relevant answer to the phrase that occurs most frequently. Particularly if it's a phrase that also was in the title, was also in the page heading, was also in the meta description. So to be found and to be judged to be relevant, you need to talk about the product or the service that you want people to find you for. Yeah? It's all about content. It's all about words. Yeah? It's as simple as that. Now, what you do need to think about is the slightly literal way that a computer is going to read your words. So, if you were producing a printed document that was talking about, I don't know, men's shoes, you could easily envisage a document that had men's shoes at the top, and then a subheading brown, and then underneath that a series of bullet points for brogues with laces, brogues with elastic sides, da-da-da-da. And a human being will link those bullet points with the subheading of brown and with the major heading of men's shoes. Computers are not that clever. And therefore, you have to give them all or most of the phrase that you're trying to be found for as a complete string. The impact of this, if done well, is spectacular. A couple of months ago, I went to meet a jeweller in Hatton Garden. Major online business, large website, vast array of all sorts of primarily silver jewellery of various sorts. And I went and had a look at his website before I went to visit him. And just as an experiment, I did a Google search for silver bracelets. No, sorry, silver earrings, and a web search for silver ankle bracelets to see where he came, because the website was all structured the same way. And very intriguingly, for silver earrings, he came up on the first page. Silver ankle bracelets, he came up on the 237th page. Why? Very simple. Every single product that was a silver earring was described as silver earring with amethyst stone, silver earring with something else, dolphin, etc. Whereas the ankle chains, because he was trying to be helpful and informative, was silver boxer ankle chain, silver baroque ankle chain, and he'd put the chain style as part of the description. Problem was, for Google, the actual phrase single silver ankle chain never appeared. And therefore, the whole of that section of his website was condemned to the bottom end of Google. Google is very literal about these things. So therefore you need to write about your products and services, including the phrase you want to be found for as that phrase. And therefore it does require not an artificially stilted style, but certainly you need to give it some thought. So if we could think about my designing a page for a hypothetical product. I want to sell blue left-handed widgets. So my page title would be Blue Left-Handed Widgets from Tony Catmull Inc. Meta description, need to amplify that, would be something like blue left-handed widgets from Tony Catmull Inc. are made from top quality stainless steel and teak from sustainable forests. Meta keywords might well be HN327 steel, it might be sustainable forestry, it might be, those sorts of things. Then move on to the visible bit. H1 heading, again, would be blue left-handed widgets from Tony Catmull Inc. Or possibly, if I've got a logo on the page for Tony Catmull Inc., just blue left-handed widgets, sufficient. And then I'm going to be talking about the product. So maybe I'm writing a sentence that's talking about the production process and quality controls. So I might write something like, here at Tony Catmull Inc., we want our blue left-handed widgets to reach you in perfect condition. Our production line for these items has 13 steps in it, all of which are computer numerically controlled. At 3 points down the production line, our quality control engineers subject your product, your purchase to detailed quality controls, and then at the end of the production line, our packers lovingly bubble wrap it to ensure that it reaches you in impeccable condition. Problem is, I've only used the phrase blue left-handed widget once. I've called them products, I've called them items, etc. Google will not make the inference. Now, you don't have to slavishly say blue left-handed widgets every time. It will be sufficient to say that our production line for left-handed widgets has 3 quality control stations, and at the end of the production line, we wrap your blue widget in bubble wrap to make sure. Because it will be happy to contribute fragments of the phrase. But if you don't use it at all, effectively, you've only actually used the phrase once. You also need to be very confident that the phrase is one that your customers will use. At a similar session to this a few months ago, at this point, one of the audience put their hand up and said, "Oh, Tony, that's great. Now I understand. What I need to do is to build one of the pages of my website to be optimized for remanufactured printer cartridges," because that's what he did. And I had to point out that he hadn't been listening. Because if you go out into Borough High Street and hold that up and say, "What's one of these?" people might call it refilled, they might call it recycled, but I promise you, only somebody in the industry would call it remanufactured. It's all about language. And it's not your language, it's their language. Yeah? So, ideally, for a page to be judged to be highly significant for a particular phrase, that phrase ought to count for between 4 and 5% of all of the words on that page. Now what that means, amongst other things, is that if you really want a page to be found, you can't pack it with many different products or services or concepts. Because I promise you, by the time you get 3 phrases, that's 15% of the words, you can't make that English. Yeah? You just can't do it. 5% is easy. And, and I'll show you an example which is probably higher than 5% and yet still reads very well. But you have to have in mind the fact that if you really want to be found for that phrase, you need to dedicate a page to it. And of course, from the point of view of your customer, that's also quite supportive, because if it's a page that's talking about your quality controls or how that device is used or a particular aspect of this, it justifies a page that talks about that, because that's what they want to know about. One of my favourite companies is Web Credible. Their offices are almost stone throwing distance from here. They are experts in this sort of thing, on website usability, website accessibility, etc. And I've just borrowed a page of their website, or part of it. Yeah? So that's their website page. And this is the actual program. And that, of course, is what is actually sent around the internet. This is constructed by the browser in your computer from that program. Yeah? So this is the product of Internet Explorer or any one of the other browser software. That's what is sent around the internet. And although it may look complicated, it's actually worryingly easy, which is why there are so many self-taught website developers around. So if we look at what they've done, the bit at the top here is the heading, which is the bit that's invisible but which is used for technical reasons by the internet. So they've got a title. And I've pulled out in yellow the words that they wanted this page to be found for, which is Website Usability Evaluation. So the title of this page is Usability Website Evaluation from Web Credible. The description amplifies that, and look how many times they've got some of those words in. Expert usability website evaluation carried out by Web Credible, a web usability and accessibility consultancy. Accessibility evaluations also available. The keywords, just repeat it, web evaluation, website evaluation, or web usability. Then look at what is actually visible. First thing, H1 heading, usability website evaluation. They then go on to talk about it. And again, our expert usability website evaluation provides a thorough analysis, etc., etc., etc. If you go to their website, I promise you that will read like normal text. And yet, like a really good, rich fruitcake, it is studded with cherries, which is the phrase that they want to be found for. And it's just about good use of English. And I promise you, if you go and look on the internet, search Google for website usability evaluation, they come up first in the world. Which is justified because they are very professional. But it is very much about the use of words because it's all about relevant information. Now, you must have spotted that when you move your mouse over a picture on a web page, sometimes a little line of text pops up, usually in white. That is the text alternative to the picture, and is driven by, therefore, something called an alt tag. It's the alternative. And it's part of the command within the website structure that says, put this picture or this diagram in that place. Now, alt tags are incredibly important for a whole variety of reasons. The first thing is, because they're text, Google will include the words in the alt tags as part of its count of the number of times that a phrase appears on a page. So if you're going to have a picture of your factory, instead of just having an alt tag which says, our factory in Streatham, how much more effective would it be if you have our blue left-hander widget factory in Streatham? You've contributed another occurrence to the count for that phrase. But more importantly, you think about all the other people that might access your website. Increasingly, we all carry mobile phones that are small computers that have access to web pages that people can browse, but they have very small screens. And therefore, not infrequently, people will turn the graphics off for speed and readability. In which case, all the graphics become the little white box with the red cross on it. Unless you have an alt tag, in which case your graphic is replaced by the words of your alt tag, and suddenly it becomes meaningful. More importantly, think about your legal obligation that your website, like all of the rest of your services, must not discriminate against the disabled, which means blind people must be able to operate your website. If any part of your website has information which is conveyed by the graphic, which could be pictures of the product, but it could just as easily be navigation. It could be the box that says home, or the box that says shopping cart, or the box that says credit card, or whatever. If that's a graphic, a blind person needs to know what that graphic does. And they get that from the alt tag. So if you don't provide good alt tags, then blind people cannot use your website. So it is critically important for a whole variety of reasons, but it also gives you an opportunity. An interesting worked example. Another client, distinctly British. They sell, as you might anticipate, lots and lots of unique and specially British products. This is actually their homepage, and it's a very interesting illustration and well worth looking at. If we take this sundial, it's an illustration, fine. So therefore, in the program, there has to be a command that says, at this point on the web page, display this picture called, which is up here. The source is that location, and the file is called syssundial.jpg. Yeah? So it says, put that picture there. But it also has an alt tag. Image alternative equals traditional British sundials. So when I put my mouse over it, up comes, now normally that would be white, but I made it yellow because it's easier for you to see. Up comes traditional brass sundials. Better still, however, if I click on that, it will also take me to the place in their catalogue where I can buy one. Now, this is just their homepage. This is not even the shopping cart. But they've got it all sussed. That little illustration is doing a whole series of jobs. Not difficult to do. Somebody's thought it through. Copywriting. It's all about words. It really is. The single most important component of your website is all about the words. It's all about the copy. So therefore, it's all about finding the phrases you want to be found for and reusing them regularly so that that page is judged to be significant. Avoid jargon, because it's probably not the language that your potential customers will use. And write like a journalist. Short phrases, lots of white space, bullet points, short paragraphs. Make it readable. Do not take your A4 brochure and just upload that as website. You cannot read as much text on a screen as you can on paper. You know? It's very tiring. It deters people. They'll just move on elsewhere. And although I've said make sure that the key phrase for which that page has been designed is repeated, don't spam. Don't just self-evidently stuff sentences with phrases that have no useful purpose. It does need to read properly. It needs to look as though you're trying to provide useful information, but nicely studded with the key phrases that you're looking for. Now, a logical corollary of everything that we've just said is that each page needs to do its own job. And I would argue that a well-designed website, remember we said that structure was an important part of this, is designed from the bottom up, not from the top down. So you start off by thinking about what are the topics, the products, the subjects that a potential customer might want to know about. And that forms your foundation. And there might be quite a lot of them. When you design them, ideally interlink them. So if I'm talking about the production line of blue left-hander widgets, and I mentioned the fact that they're made from teak, the word teak should be a hyperlink to the page that talks about the fact that we're a deeply green organisation, that we sponsor teak forests, that we replant twice as many teak trees as we cut down, or whatever. Yeah? Because that's what makes interesting websites, is the fact that it's not serial like a book. it is interconnected. But more importantly, it also makes it important for Google, because Google will follow those links. And therefore, if you've got useful phrases on the linked pages that contribute to the significance of the page you're on, Google will add them in. So you can now start to get a weight of benefit out of the multiple pages in your website.